The air in Lakewood Springs felt unnaturally still that evening, like the world itself had stopped breathing, watching in disbelief at the spectacle unfolding in the courthouse yard. A ragged wooden stage had been thrown together the night before, creaking beneath the boots of men with too much pride and too little conscience. Beneath the dim, sputtering oil lamps and the low hum of murmurs and bets, a girl no older than 19 stood barefoot on the splintered platform, her hands trembling, her lips pressed together in a defiance that had long forgotten what victory felt like. Her name was Sarah Collins. No chains bound her limbs, but the humiliation was its own kind of iron. She wore a pale blue dress, stained at the hem with dust and shame, and in her glassy eyes burned the quiet rage of someone betrayed not by strangers, but by blood. Her father, Gerald Collins, a man with a hard jaw and eyes like frostbite, stood off to the side, arms folded across his chest as if this were just another business transaction, no more personal than the sale of a mule or a bag of grain. He looked through her, not at her, his voice cutting through the whispers like a blade. This girl is of age, healthy and debt-free. Starting at $50. There was a moment of silence. Then laughter. Then the bidding began. The crowd was a carnival of cruelty, farmers, landowners, and petty men drunk on the illusion of power. Some bid for amusement, others out of curiosity. One man, sweaty and red-faced, offered $55 just to see if she screamed. Another, a banker with gold teeth, leaned in with a grin, suggesting she might make a fine servant, or something warmer come winter. But just as the numbers began to climb, a voice, clear, low, and utterly unexpected, broke through the noise. 70. The crowd froze. A tall black man stood near the back, holding a weathered Stetson in one hand and a folded $10 bill in the other. His clothes were plain, but his posture was iron straight. His face bore the lines of someone who had lived too much and spoken too little. His name, though few cared to remember it, was Isaiah Montgomery, a war veteran, widower, and the quiet keeper of a half-dead farm on the edge of town. He didn't blink. He didn't smile. He merely repeated, steady and calm, $70. Cash. A murmur swept through the crowd like a brush fire. Whispers turned to jeers. Someone spat. Someone else yelled, "That N thinks he can buy a white girl?" But Isaiah didn't flinch. He simply walked forward, laid the bills one by one into the auctioneer's pale, shaking hand, then turned to the girl. No hesitation, no pity, just a nod. Sarah looked at him, confused, furious, uncertain whether to be grateful or afraid. She stepped off the stage, barefoot, cheeks burning, as if trying to vanish into the ground. Isaiah didn't touch her, didn't speak. He simply walked, and she followed, because where else could she go? Behind them, the crowd erupted in outrage. Men cursed. Women clutched their pearls. Someone hurled a bottle that missed Isaiah by inches and shattered on the ground. But he kept walking, through the dust, through the venom, through the blind hatred of a town too small for dignity and too proud for shame. And as they disappeared down the dirt road that led away from the courthouse into the dark and wind-blown quiet of the prairie, no one noticed that Isaiah's hand trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of knowing what he had just done. He hadn't bought a girl. He had bought a war. The ride back to the Montgomery farm was silent. The sun had long sunk below the horizon, leaving behind a smoldering line of orange just above the hills, a dying fire in a wide and empty sky. The buggy wheels creaked over gravel and dry earth, each turn echoing into the stillness, like a question no one wanted to ask. Sarah sat rigid beside Isaiah, arms folded tightly across her chest, her body turned half away, as if shielding herself from the shame, or from him, or both. Her face was stone, but her eyes flickered with quiet panic, wary, watchful, like a bird who knew even the softest hand might suddenly snap shut. Isaiah didn't speak. His hands remained steady on the reins, guiding the mule with the quiet assurance of a man who had spent years not needing to explain himself. His face gave nothing away, but beneath that weathered skin and solemn calm, his thoughts moved like storm water under ice. He had seen many kinds of violence in his life, on the battlefield, in the woods of Mississippi, in the stares of men who smiled with hatred in their eyes, but this girl's silence unnerved him more than the sound of gunfire ever had. There was something hollow in it, something familiar. When they reached the edge of the property, the trees parted to reveal the farm, a simple two-story house with chipped white paint, a barn leaning tiredly to one side, and fields that stretched outward like a prayer whispered too late. No lights shone in the windows, only the dull glow of the moon casting long, skeletal shadows over the porch. Isaiah helped her down, but didn't reach for her. He stepped back, gave her space, gestured toward the house. "You'll sleep inside," he said, his voice low and gravel-worn. "Upstairs. First door on the right." She looked at him for a long moment, not moving. Then, finally, with slow, stiff steps, she entered the house. He waited until the door clicked shut behind her before following, not up the stairs, but into the kitchen, where he poured a glass of water with shaking hands and stared out the window, into nothing. Upstairs, Sarah stood in the small bedroom, her arms hanging at her sides, eyes locked on the bed. It was made neatly, with a faded quilt and a single pillow. A pitcher of water sat beside a worn Bible on the nightstand. She touched nothing. Instead, she sat on the edge of the bed, shoulders curled forward, and let her breath come slow and shallow, like she was afraid even air could betray her. Neither of them slept much that night. When morning came, it brought no grand gesture, no healing light, just the smell of black coffee and the sound of chickens clucking somewhere out back. Isaiah was already outside by the time Sarah stepped into the kitchen, his shirt rolled at the sleeves, dirt under his nails, sweat glistening at the nape of his neck. He didn't greet her. He simply pointed to a bowl of oats on the table and returned to work like nothing had changed. But something had. The days passed in a rhythm of cautious coexistence. She swept floors, washed dishes, fed the animals. He repaired fences, plowed rows, hauled feed. They spoke only when necessary. Her voice was clipped. His was quiet. But in their silence, something brittle began to soften. She noticed how he never looked at her too long, how he never raised his voice, never slammed a door. He noticed how she folded her sleeves like she was hiding old bruises, how she jumped slightly when thunder cracked, how her hands worked quickly, precisely, like someone who'd had to survive. And though they never spoke of the courthouse, or her father, or the auction that had hung over them like a noose, the memory clung to them both. Like smoke, like shame. Then, one afternoon, as Sarah was pulling weeds from the garden, she heard Isaiah speak, not to her, but to the wind. "You know," he said, kneeling beside her with his back to the sun, "a man once told me freedom's just another word for not owing anybody." He was wrong. She looked at him, surprised. He didn't return the glance, just kept digging. "Freedom's a heavy thing," he said. "You carry it alone long enough, it turns to stone." She opened her mouth, closed it, looked down at the soil between her fingers. "I didn't ask you to save me," she whispered. Isaiah paused. Then, without looking at her, replied, "Didn't save you. Just ended a transaction." She didn't smile, but she didn't look away either. That night, after supper, she stood in the doorway as Isaiah cleaned his rifle, a quiet ritual he performed every evening with the same reverence one might give to prayer. She hesitated, then stepped forward. "My name's not just Sarah," she said. "It's Sarah Grace." Isaiah looked up. Their eyes met, and for a brief second, the silence between them was no longer hollow, but full of something unspoken and almost sacred. "Isaiah," he replied softly. "Just Isaiah." In that moment, between a name and its echo, two wounded souls took one quiet step toward each other, not as captor and captive, not as man and woman, not even as black and white, but as survivors. By the third week, the quiet between them no longer stung. It had ripened into something less like absence and more like restraint, like the calm that settles over two people not because they have nothing to say, but because both are waiting for the other to blink first. Sarah had taken to walking the property alone in the early evenings, just as the sun slanted low through the cottonwoods and the air turned heavy with honeysuckle and dust. Isaiah watched her sometimes from the porch, pretending to read. She carried herself differently now, still wary, still coiled like wire beneath the skin, but no longer shrinking, no longer fractured in the way he'd first seen her. There was a storm inside her. He could feel it, and it wasn't fear. It was calculation. He began to notice the small things. The way she handled the lockbox in the pantry with too much familiarity. The way she asked quiet, careful questions about the land, about the town, about the marshal. The way her eyes lingered a beat too long on the rifle above the hearth, not with curiosity, but with measure. Then one morning, while Isaiah was mending a trough out back, Sarah stood at the kitchen window sharpening a kitchen knife, slowly, deliberately, edge against whetstone, her wrist steady, her jaw tight. It wasn't the blade that unsettled him. It was the memory it triggered. The same gesture, the same steel-eyed quiet. He had seen it before, in the war, in women whose homes had been burned and whose sons had been buried too early. He had seen it in a young nurse in Georgia who slit a man's throat while smiling politely. He had seen it in prisoners who waited. That night, as they sat in silence over cornbread and beans, he finally asked, "You were heading west when I found you," he said without looking up.
Alone.
No escort. No horse. Just boots too fine for field work and a dress that wasn't yours. Sarah didn't flinch. He set down his fork. Was there a plan, Sarah Grace? She took a sip of water, slow and deliberate, then met his gaze. Would it matter if there was? He studied her. Might. She leaned back in her chair. You think I'm here because I was sold, she said. You think I'm just another broken girl with nowhere to go. Her voice was calm, stripped of all pretense. But I chose that auction, Isaiah. I needed to disappear. And in this country, there ain't no safer place for a white girl than in the hands of a black man nobody will listen to. The words hung in the air like the click of a loaded gun. Isaiah didn't move. She stood, quietly cleared her plate, and placed it in the basin. I didn't know what kind of man you were, she added. But I figured if you bid on me, it meant you were either dangerous or tired. Either way, I could work with it. He sat back slowly, as if absorbing a hit he hadn't seen coming. So you played the victim. She shrugged. I was a victim, but I'm not helpless. She turned toward him then, and for the first time since that long ride home, there was no curtain behind her eyes. Just raw honesty, jagged and brave. I ran because my father tried to sell me to a sheriff twice his age who beat his first wife into the grave, she said. And because I found the ledger he kept, names, dates, payments, men he owed, girls he traded, some of them barely 13. And I was next. Isaiah's hands clenched slowly around the table's edge. I knew they'd come after me, she continued. So, I made myself bait. And now they think I'm gone. Lost property. They're not looking here. Not yet. Silence stretched between them. Outside, the wind began to rise, shaking the barn shutters and whispering through the trees like something ancient stirring. I didn't come here to trap you, she said. But I also didn't come to be saved. Isaiah stood, walked to the stove, poured himself a drink with hands that didn't shake, but only just. He stared into the firelight. You've been carrying that alone? She nodded. Then why tell me now? Sarah looked down at her hands. Because I think they're coming, she said. And because if they do, you need to know which side I'm on. There was no tremor in her voice. No plea. Just the dry, tired truth of a woman who had learned not to hope for rescue but who, tonight, decided to trust anyway. Isaiah didn't speak for a long time. Then, finally, he turned. There's a safe in the root cellar, he said. Behind the salt barrels. Inside's a Colt, 2 boxes of shells, and a folded letter with a seal on it. If I'm gone, open it. It'll tell you who I was. And who you can call. She looked at him, something flickering behind her expression. And if you're not gone, then we make sure they are. Their eyes met. Not as man and woman. Not as protector and protected. But as co-conspirators. as broken creatures shaped by fire and betrayal, now fused not by mercy, but by purpose. That night, the wind didn't howl. It waited, because somewhere beyond the hills, men were riding. And this time, Sarah Grace wasn't the hunted. She was ready. The first sign wasn't hoofbeats. It was silence. The kind of silence that doesn't belong on a working farm, where even the wind carries stories and the trees whisper with cicadas. This silence was hollow, crouching low across the fields like a predator. Isaiah noticed it before Sarah did, pausing mid-step as he loaded the last bale into the barn. His breath caught, nostrils flaring. No birds. No dogs barking in the valley. No insects. Just stillness. He reached for the shotgun, hanging on the inside beam. Sarah appeared beside him without a word, as if summoned by the same instinct. She wasn't dressed like the girl he'd first brought home. No corset. No lace. Just a buttoned shirt, trousers rolled at the ankle, and a leather belt strapped tight across her hips. And tucked into the back of that belt, the Colt from the root cellar, now loaded and primed. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Trouble had found them. At dusk, the riders came. 3 of them, dark silhouettes against the burnt gold skyline, moving with the loose arrogance of men who think they've already won. They didn't dismount. Just called out like they owned the land. Evening. Look in for a runaway. Pretty girl. Pale. Might have passed this way. Isaiah stood in the doorway, one hand resting calmly on the post. No girls here but mine. And she ain't lost. Laughter. Then, well, we were told otherwise. Isaiah's eyes were quiet steel. You were told wrong. The one in front nudged his horse forward. Now listen. No need to be unneighborly. There's money on her. Paper from the state. She's a wanted thief, you see. That's when Sarah stepped out from behind the door. No fear. No trembling. Just fire. Tell my father I'm not his anymore, she said. Tell him the next man he sends will ride home with his teeth in a saddlebag. The man blinked. The confidence in his posture twitched. I remember you, he muttered. You were at that auction. Filthy little scheme, wasn't it? She smiled thinly. It worked, didn't it? Then everything moved at once. The man reached for his holster, but Isaiah was faster. The shotgun roared, and the rider's shoulder exploded in red mist, sending him sprawling into the dust. One of the others tried to wheel around, but Sarah stepped into the open, firing clean and controlled. 2 shots. One hit the horse's flank, the second buried in the man's thigh. The third dismounted and ran. Isaiah didn't chase him. He knew better. A wounded man talks. A terrified one spreads fear. They tied the injured men to the old fence post with iron chain and silence. Sarah stood over one of them, eyes unreadable. You tell my father this ain't the same girl who hid under his table, she said. I don't run anymore. I bury things. Later, after the blood was scrubbed from the porch and the wind began to sing again, Isaiah poured 2 glasses of rye and handed her one. They sat beneath the stars in the quiet that only comes after fire and victory. You could still go, he said. They'll be back. Next time worse. Sarah sipped slowly. So, let them come. I'm not the one who should be running. He looked at her, saw the hard-earned weight behind her words. She had changed, not into someone new, but into the woman she was always meant to become. Not just a survivor. A reckoning. And Isaiah, he wasn't just the broken warhorse anymore. He was a sentinel, a partner, a shield sharpened by old battles and given new purpose by a fire not his own. They were not safe, but they were ready. And for the first time in years, the night didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a promise. Morning broke like a bruise, purple clouds hanging low, sun straining through them like light behind a closed fist. The earth felt tense beneath the boots of 2 people who had dared not only to survive, but to fight back. They both knew it hadn't ended. Isaiah found Sarah already in the barn, her hands moving with ritual precision as she checked the bridle straps and cleaned the old mare's hooves. She didn't look up when she spoke. They'll send someone bigger next. Not thugs. Not bounty hunters. Somebody dressed clean. Somebody with paper and law in his voice. Isaiah nodded. Or worse, someone with manners. By noon, they had company. A polished carriage rolled into the yard, drawn by 2 white horses too fine for dirt roads. It wasn't guarded by armed men, but by silence and the unmistakable scent of confidence. Out stepped a man in gray, civilized, soft-spoken, with the cold efficiency of a butcher who never stains his hands. He introduced himself as Mr. Carraway, legal representative of Judge Richard Lane, Sarah's father. "I come bearing lawful writ," he said, eyes cool, voice thick with southern honey. "And, if necessary, funds. We needn't make this difficult." Isaiah leaned against the doorframe, arms folded, jaw set. "Depends on what you call difficult." Carraway smiled politely. "The girl has debts. Debts of birth. Debts of silence. Her disappearance has caused embarrassment, you understand." Sarah stepped into view, face unreadable. "What about the ledgers?" The man tilted his head. "Pardon?" "The ones he kept under the floorboard. Names. Payments. Children sold to settle court favors." Carraway's smile thinned. "You're speaking dangerously, Mississippi Lane." Sarah's voice didn't rise. It didn't have to. "So, am I living?" Isaiah took a slow step forward. "We know who he is. And what he's done." The man adjusted his cuffs, as if brushing off dust that hadn't dared land. "And what do you intend to do with such knowledge, Mr. Freeman? Shout it from a barn roof? They won't listen to you. A war veteran. A black man. And her?" He glanced at Sarah. "A runaway with bruises and no title. Society won't bend for 2 shadows." Isaiah stepped closer. "Maybe not, but it might break." The silence between them was not polite. It was deadly. Then Sarah spoke, pulling from her coat a single page, yellowed and creased. The seal of the Union Army visible in wax. "I'm not just a runaway," she said. "And he's not just a farmer." She handed it to Carraway, who scanned the contents and froze. It was a signed affidavit. A battlefield pardon. Names of witnesses. And the mark of General Tilson himself. It detailed Isaiah Freeman's role in the rescue of a captured Union brigade, white officers and all, during a covert mission that had been buried in red tape for years. "You see," Sarah said gently, "when you live long enough in the margins, you start collecting things. Documents. Truths. Weapons that don't need bullets." Carraway looked up, face pale. "Where did you get this?" Isaiah's eyes burned. "Doesn't matter. But it's enough to open doors. To newspapers. To a federal judge up north who still owes me a letter." The man's voice faltered. "This could complicate matters." "No," Isaiah said. "It ends them." Carraway adjusted his gloves, lips pressed thin. "Very well," he said at last. "But understand this. Silence is expensive. And justice, true justice, is never free." Sarah stepped forward. "We already paid. In years. In scars. In names we stopped answering to." And Isaiah, his voice like steel wrapped in velvet, added, "So if you or your judge ever send another man here, send 2. One to take me down, and one to write the eulogy." The man didn't respond. He turned, climbed into the carriage, and vanished down the road, his pride trailing behind him like smoke from a dying fire. They stood alone again, but taller. Later, as the day sank into shadow, Sarah sat beside Isaiah on the porch, eyes tired but burning. "That paper you showed him. Why didn't you ever use it?" Isaiah looked to the horizon. "Because I didn't need the world to know who I was. I needed to remember it." She placed her hand over his. "And now," he smiled faintly, "now I need them to." Behind them, the wind rustled through the fields, no longer a warning, but a witness. Honor had cost them everything. Their peace, their past, their chance to disappear. But in choosing to stand and be seen, they had bought something rarer than freedom. They had reclaimed the right to exist without shame. And in this corner of the world, forgotten by most but feared by the powerful, justice had spoken not with laws, but with truth. And it had remembered their names. The sun was folding itself into the earth when the mailman came. Just a rusted red truck trailing dust, with a flag raised like an accidental salute. He dropped a single envelope in the box and left without looking back, unaware of the weight he had just delivered. Sarah found it later, tucked between the feed orders and a catalog. Her name, Mississippi Sarah Lane, typed in careful ink. No return address. No insignia. Only silence sealed in paper. Inside was a check. A large one. No explanation. Just one word in tight handwriting on the back. Enough. She stared at it for a long time, as if it might grow fangs or wings, then handed it to Isaiah without saying a word. He looked at it, then at her. They both knew where it had come from. Not guilt, power, trying to disappear a truth it could no longer control. He lit a match. The flames ate through the paper slowly, as if reluctant to consume it. When it was ash, Sarah whispered, "That wasn't a bribe." Isaiah nodded.
No.
It was a surrender. The wind scattered the remains into the soil. A payment buried, not spent. Weeks passed. The fields softened under spring's touch. Animals grew calmer. Visitors to the town noticed that the Freeman place no longer looked forgotten. Paint found its way onto wood. A new fence rose like a quiet hymn to dignity. And for the first time in years, children from the nearby school rode their bikes past the edge of the farm without fear. Something unspoken had changed. Isaiah didn't talk much about the judge anymore. He didn't need to. The silence that once wrapped around him like a shroud had become something different, less a burden, more a choice. Sarah started writing again. Not letters, not ledgers. Stories. Her own. Some days, she mailed them out to nowhere in particular, publishers, newspapers, even universities. Most didn't write back. Some did. One morning, Isaiah found her crying on the steps, not from pain, but from a folded letter bearing the seal of a liberal arts college in the North. A scholarship. A teaching position offer. They had read her essay, the one about living like a ghost in a house that wouldn't forget. He asked her quietly, "Will you go?" She shook her head. "Not yet. This place still remembers me, and I still owe it something." He smiled. "It already forgave you." One evening, a stranger knocked. Young, dressed too well for dusty roads, eyes like someone who had never known the inside of a barn but wanted to. He was quiet, polite, asking if this was the farm where the veteran lived. He had heard stories about a man who stood up to power and a woman who turned her pain into fire. He was looking for work. Isaiah looked at his hands, soft palms, raw pride, and said, "We don't hire cowards. But if you're willing to learn, we teach." The boy stayed. And then another came. And another. Not all were looking for work. Some brought letters. Some brought silence and just needed to be heard. The porch became a strange kind of altar where lost people came not for sermons, but for something rarer. Truth without judgment. One night, Sarah asked, "Do you think this will last?" Isaiah looked up at the sky, where the stars blinked like distant fires refusing to die. "No," he said softly, "but maybe it'll spread." And in that moment, with the wind dancing through wheat and the ghosts of the past finally resting, there was something fragile yet defiant rising in the air. Not triumph, not justice. Something older. Hope. The kind that grows not in glory, but in quiet places, in tired hands, in rebuilt fences and burned letters. Hope from the ashes.